This is a mindfulness class, which is, I don't know what that is, but it's Buddhism light, I guess, is what it's called. All the nutrition, but none of the fat. So last week, how many of you are new? Just a few, okay. So I could ask maybe the first one of you, the fellow in there. Nice mustache, yes. What brought you? Just curious.
The lady brought me.
Hey, you could do worse.
Yeah. A good friend.
Okay, and a friend brought you. You're a good friend. And yes.
I'm new to the Salt Lake City area. Came from Boulder, Colorado, attended Naropa, and community here.
Okay, so you're kind of looking for cultural resonance. Resonance.
Very much so.
Yeah. So last week, one of the things that we talk about a lot is that any kind of a contemplative practice, anything where you're turning your attention inward and watching your mind states, your emotional states, the interaction of thoughts and feelings, because feelings generate thoughts and thoughts generate feelings, and your external experiences trigger both. One of the objectives, if you're doing it other than just, idle tourism, is to actually begin to notice your habit patterns. In other words, the automatic ways that you both see and respond to phenomena, people, situations. And there's an interplay, a neurologic, psychological interplay between how you see the world, how you've been acculturated to see it, whether it's from family, whether it's your experiences, even if it's genetics, personality type. The view you take on the world is a perspective. It is not the only perspective. It's a perspective which functions well for you, doesn't require you to actually think, and was useful at one time when you actually devoted attention to the thing that gives rise to the pattern, and then once you learned it, you put it away, and it's just part of your automatic processing. So that perspective you take on things or people or categories of things and people, experiences, the science would suggest you actually look for what you're expecting, and you will find what you're looking for. And you will then respond to the phenomena as though it were actually what you were looking for. Now, in fact, there are a lot of perspectives on any phenomena, but you have one that you've acculturated and institutionalized and internalized. And it's invisible to you because it is essentially has become part of you, in that that's how this mind body manifests in the world. It sees, it looks for a certain thing, it sees it, and it responds to it. And until there's a tremendous dissonance between your response and the phenomena's response to you, if you will, you don't see it. It's invisible to you. It is you. But when you begin to do contemplative practice and look inward and notice what's arising moment to moment, notice what's repeated, notice the way when you have a feeling or a memory or an emotion, notice how you view it, how you critique yourself, how you critique that which gives rise to it, how you judge it, what boxes you put it in. When you begin to see that, then this automaticity begins to be visible. Sometimes only slightly, and sometimes not consciously. But the more, and this is where you have to trust in the practice, the more you do the practice, the more you will gradually begin to notice that you see things differently. You see your own responses. You begin to see that there's a choice rather than the automatic response that you've programmed. And that, I always say to people, sit for 6 weeks, every day, and then just start noticing. And you will notice. It takes the discipline of sitting. It's sort of like working out, You don't go to the gym one day, work out, go home, feel achy, and say, well, I guess that was it. I'm fixed. It's a practice, and you have to keep doing it. But you will begin to notice parts of yourself that become visible, and you realize they aren't necessarily fixed identity. That isn't part of necessarily who you are. This is just a conditioning for this creature. So one of the things that Diane talked about last week was, she had people get in groups of 3 and sort of talk about habit patterns that they had. What do you know about how you actually respond to phenomena? What triggers you? What are some things you're probably aware of, because I would guess there's enough dissonance between what you're doing and what you would like it to produce, that you're aware of some of the things you do that you don't particularly like. Or maybe you love them. I don't know. But the point is, some things you're aware of largely because of the results they yield or don't yield. And so she had you in groups of 3s talking about them, and suggested when the day was over that you, during the week, actually see if you could notice some. And notice, could you really look for them? Look for them as they just arise in your thoughts, in the way you respond to people. And I'd like to have you do that. But before I do that, I would just also suggest one of the things that practice does, it allows you to notice these things. And of course you have to have some motivation to spend the time looking inward. And presumably you aren't here if you don't have some motivation, because you could be doing something else. But you need to carry that into a daily practice, really. Doing it once a week isn't going to cut it. Better you do 5 minutes a day than you do an hour and a half a week, because you want to make it habitual. And you want to make it habitual for the same reason if you want to memorize something, you recite it every day, you don't recite it once a week. Because it becomes part of your conscious and unconscious intention, your plan for what you're going to do. And the other thing about so where does the practice take you? When you begin to see these things, it begins to awaken your desire to change some of them. Doesn't mean you're judging yourself critically, but you're curious about what's happening, and then you begin to see there are other responses to this stimulus. There's other things I could do in response to these triggering events, and I'm actually free to pick a different response. I don't have to behave out of my habitual pattern. I can use my prefrontal cortex and make some choices, as opposed to allowing my amygdala, if you will, to tell me what to do. And Diane, we were talking last night, one example she gave me was, I had 3 daughters when we got married. She had a son, and 2 of my daughters had this R issue. They wouldn't pronounce their R's right. They kind of missed their R's. And they did it for a long time. And the middle one had stopped it, but the younger one was doing it. And I wish I could remember exactly how to imitate it. Somebody knows how little kids do with R's. What is that?
Like Elmer Fudd?
Widow like Elmer Fudd. It's a widow bed. A widow like a wabbit. And one day Diane just said to her, "Stop it!" As only Diane can do.
Right.
Yeah.
She stopped it. I mean, what was the motivation? I'm not quite sure, but there was something that told her, okay, time to do something different. An experience I had when I was, I think I was probably 21 or something like that. And I'd been going to college for about 4.5 years at that point, doing poorly, working like 60 hours a week. I'd been hot rodding, drinking too much, and I was, at the time, I had somehow moved to Salt Lake, and I was living in my parents' basement and working all night, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And getting up at the morning, and I would get off work and I'd go to a bar and try and find somebody to have a beer with. And the people you meet at 7 in the morning in beer bars, not exactly, not life companions. And then I flunked out of a class that semester, and I got sick and couldn't take some finals, and I stuffed my car in a barrel pit, and I just kind of looked around and said, wow, this is not going anyplace positive. And even though that I'd been doing this for quite a while, I just stopped. I just stopped. And I cut back on my work, and I just spent all my time doing schoolwork. And I graduated from college and went to law school and got really lucky and, managed to put a career together. And why did I do it? And I could never tell you why. It was just that things had gotten so shitty with no prospect of going anyplace that I just decided it was time to stop it. And it's a little like when I came to meditation, I was really hard driving, really competitive, really pushy lawyer, and I was getting migraine headaches and all, and getting mad at people all the time. And I saw a doctor from the LDS Institute because I was having migraines, and he said, "We should try meditation." And I said, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." And that was in about 84. And all I did is just up my exercise regimen. I said, I don't have time for that. And I didn't start meditating until after, some of you probably know, my wife was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and exercising wasn't helping, and drinking more wasn't helping, and we went to a John Kabat-Zinn workshop, And when she was close to death, I started meditating. You know, but it took a kick in the head. You know, it wasn't enough just to suggest it was a good idea. I had to get to where there was nothing else was going to take care of it. But I think with any luck, we don't all have to wait until we're kicked in the head, you know. If whatever's bringing you here is enough to get you to actually spend 5 or 10 minutes a day just quietly looking inward and watching your habit patterns, that alone will produce, if you do it, it will begin to reinforce itself enough that you'll keep at it. And you can't know where that's going to take you. But I would say where it's going to take you is a place that brings you more into harmony with your existence, with the nature of things, with your impermanence, with your interdependence with other people and other things, with your mortality, you know, old age, sickness, and death, which we all face all the time. So I would just say it will do that. And all it takes is you're spending some time and being willing to devote some time to it. And don't wait, you know. So I'd like you to get in groups of 3, and I'd like you to address, what I'll do is I'll ring the bell every 3 minutes, I guess. And and first I'd like you to go around relatively, well, maybe it's going to take 3 minutes. So 3 minutes each, and start out and think of a habit pattern that you have that's automatic and that you notice and isn't necessarily productive. Okay? Then I'd like you, the second go around, to think of a time when you made a dramatic shift in your life. And why? What was the motivator? What kick-started it? Okay? All right? So, 3 people nearby. It's probably as good as anything if you don't know them. We have, there's 3, no, there's 2, there's 3. Do we have one spare person? Do we have groups of 3, or do we have a 1? Do we have any singletons? Craig?
I still do it. And I can recognize when I do it. So I avoid that's all I do. And
So is it going to be 9 minutes, 3, 3, and 3? Okay.
not always be I think there's good things about that because I get along with a lot of people. Seeing an easy what's that? But it's bad for I perceive things in this context that aren't necessarily
time in your life when you made a change? For reasons you're not quite sure of or sure?
Do you notice the moment when you
Sometimes I kind of do, yeah, what I'm trying to avoid. Sometimes I do, and a lot of times I don't have to go back to a while later. But sometimes I still choose to, it's like so ingrained that I still, like I get this whole, we were talking about like, I'm not the light person, I'm just light person. And I get that, there's energy and kind of making mind where you can't make good decisions. So I feel like, a lot of times I feel like if I did respond at the moment, I wouldn't be a good response. Or I'm not, my brain gets so, so scattered that I can't come up with things. So I tend to just not do anything about it. And then I won't do anything about it, or I'll come back and I know there are practices that respond, like, give me 10 minutes, I'll get back to you. If somebody asks me to do this, not a good idea or not fair or whatever. Instead of, and I just love to say, instead of just, that's my thing.
You got 10 more seconds. Next person.
Not opposite ones, like you, if you see a conflict, you want to fix it. Or something that you
but like, I have like one favorites. Just like if my, I guess, it's easy that way, but I guess like a situation and like things to be like if I have a date planned and things aren't sticking up like I intended them to, so I start, that's what I mean. It's like more rigid that way. Like, I got a flat tire on the way to work, and I wanted to just be able to just take a breath and be able to can't control those things. That's not my personality. Like, my day,
Next person.
So for me, I noticed that aspect of distracting as well. Usually, like I really don't try to underneath that habit pattern. I notice
that's why this is probably going to be for the rest of my life when I stuff. And I really was confronted with that this last week. I was when you visiting with myself. started staying at his house. And he was
In the moment when that happens, there's no why.
really, he has done a lot of good work in his life. And I noticed how he's trying to talk about it again, how that defensive pattern inside of me. And it's not, it came up earlier and then it came now in my life.
I don't know, there's been several times, like when I first turned this in.
Because I learned to be more intimate
Decided, or actually it was more true like last year. Like I decided what I was doing for my life. I had to, something's gotta happen.
How I reacted, my having how strong that was in relationship to him. There's a lot of hurt and of course, and it really wasn't necessary at all. It was not passive aggressive or any of the things that I probably and the interesting thing is I was really able to notice my interaction, that taste, that texture inside. And I got really interested in wanting to become like clear, even
Okay, let's come back. We didn't talk about the second.
Second one. Oh, I thought we didn't have to do
Somewhere.
There you go.
I don't.
I can't think of one that I really fixed recently either, like major
It's okay.
changes.
It was nice to share with you.
Actually,
How many of you got to both of those? Okay, how many didn't? Okay. As Craig said, the pattern is not following instructions. I guess maybe my pattern is not giving them good enough. Well, so, what did you notice when you talked about it? Did you see anything a little differently about, yeah?
So I have one. I mean, I was meditating so powerfully last night in a hot tub, man. I'm telling you, but yeah, that's a good place to meditate, all by myself, early in the morning. But the thing is, my mind's empty, man. I don't like. And the Dalai Lama, I was listening. He says, I think when I meditate, he meditates 4 hours in the morning, and he's like, analytic meditation, thinking. It's more important to think, you know, but I don't know how, I don't know the Dharma, I don't know what to think about, so I don't know how to analyze my patterns.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair, yeah.
So I kind of talked about this last week, the pattern I've noticed with my mother and the aggression that we've had towards each other. And so
I'm sure nobody else can relate.
So I see that, and I've been showing up differently in the relationship, but I'm still kind of struggling with going to the opposite end of almost being a little too accommodating. And so I'm still trying to find that balance of holding my own strength and not just going to these two extremes.
So what I would say is what you're trying to do is bring online your judgment. I don't mean judgment like good or bad, I mean what's the wise thing to do? You know, you can go from hostility to idiot compassion, you know. But what's wisdom? And that's part of the idea, is that as you begin to see your automaticity, you don't just switch to a new automatic. You really, that's when wisdom comes. That's when wisdom comes into play, where you have to actually look around and say, now what's the wise thing to do in this situation? What's going to produce not just short-term relief, but what's going to be a way of addressing this as I go forward, to account for the fact that everything I do has consequences, you know. And if I turn into the other, if I become completely accommodating, what's that going to produce? Well, you can see where that's going to go if you think about it. Even though in the moment it might feel the easiest thing to do. So you really bring your prefrontal cortex online. Yes, there was another hand. I saw, yeah.
Expanding on that, one of the problems I have with doing that is figuring out what the wise thing is in a productive time frame.
Okay, well, that's a nice little opening. I'll give you what I think would be let's say the Dharma teaching on that, but I think it's basically the reality teaching, which is if you really look and realize that everything is interdependent and nothing is permanent. Okay? So nothing is permanent, nothing lasts forever. You don't, mountains don't, nothing does. And nothing exists apart from everything else, right? Everything, a mountain is a product of interactions, you know, the crust moving and tectonic forces, etc. And you're a product of your parents and your culture and the way you were raised and everything about you. And everybody you interact with. So if in fact I recognize interdependence and impermanence, then if I'm going to act towards somebody, something, I'm going to have to act from a recognition that whatever I do is going to have an impact on other people, and that's going to have also an impact on me. And what's the thing that I could do that will bring everything sort of into balance? Foreseeably, the best I can guess, now and going forward. It's like the question that was asked about the mother, you know. What's the wise thing to do, recognizing I'm going to continue to have interactions and recognizing whatever I do is going to have a consequence. So I try to make a judgment based on that. And I'm connected to you and I'm connected to everybody else. And we all interact constantly and I can't quite know where it's all going to go. So do I act as though I'm totally autonomous? My interaction with everybody and everything doesn't mean anything. What's most important is just me. Is that going to work for me in the long run? Is it likely to work in the situation that I'm in right now? And then in the next moment I may have to make another choice because I don't really know whatever I do, I don't quite know how everybody else and everything else is going to respond to it. Right? Because if I think I know what everybody's going to do and I expect them to keep doing it, then what? I'm right back to thinking they're a habit pattern, that they're going to respond as automatically as I do. But I don't always respond automatically, so they won't either. And then we kind of co-create each other, right? So if I'm mean to my dog's going to be a mean dog, right? If I'm nice to my dog is going to be a nice dog. And then I will come to expect my dog to be mean, or I expect my dog to be nice, and I will treat the dog accordingly, and it will treat me accordingly. So not only are you habituated in your automaticity, your relationships are the result of your interaction with the other person, other people. How you choose to treat them, they are most likely going to manifest as though the way you treated them is who you are. If you're a jerk, they're going to say, he's a jerk. And they're going to do what you do with people, is they're going to put you in the file cabinet under jerk. And they won't have to think about you again. They'll just say jerk. And the fact that you happen to be disgruntled that day isn't going to matter much. Jerk. You're just a jerk. And they got you taken care of. They don't have to think about you anymore. They don't have to make any detailed calculations of what to do with you. And then they treat you like a jerk. And how do you feel? You feel like a jerk. So then you reinforce them. So I think all that just says, if you want a reference point, the reference point is interdependence, and you can't know the consequences of what you're doing. That's a pretty fair reference point. It means whatever I'm feeling in this very moment, whatever mood I have, I can choose to act out of it. I'm feeling cranky, I can be cranky. Or I can actually say, yeah, I feel cranky, and do I want to, is that how I want to establish my relationship with the next person I deal with, the next thing I deal with? Or do I think it would be more fruitful for them and for me to actually, okay, I'm feeling cranky, let's take a breath and let go of it and try to take my automatic self offline and just be open and available to the moment without looking at it through my mood, my anger, my desire, my whatever, my fear. Can I step back from the self that's sort of the concretizing tendency to categorize everything and then live on automatic pilot? Can I step out of that? You do all the time. You know, you do when you're deeply engaged in a task, you know, where you're trying to get a thing done that requires intellectual or physical direction. You do that. You step out of your habit patterns to a large degree. You can see a problem holistically sometimes. Well, that's the same thing you're doing when you step out of yourself. You kind of see everything holistically. You kind of get a sense of, oh, well, this is how this might work. When you're not so invested in in fortifying your habit patterns because you believe you are them. Is that helpful at all? Yeah.
So I have a comment. It sounds like I have a similar issue that you mentioned, that you can't do the right or make the decision in a timely manner. So eventually you probably can get to it, but it just takes too long, and so it doesn't happen in the moment. And for me, it's usually because when I'm in that situation, my mind goes to, the fight or flight response gets triggered, and I can't think straight, and so I don't make the right decision because of that, having this scattered brain.
Mm-hmm.
But I look at it later, and it's really clear. It's like, oh. So I think the whole point of sitting in practice is that you don't let your brain go into the fight or flight. Or when it does, you recognize that how to
Well, how to stop it?
how to stop it, or how
Take-
to react.
Take 3 deep breaths.
Which
you
I
know.
certainly can't do it, but I understand that it could be done. Somebody can do it.
But stopping and taking 3 long, slow, deep breaths and feeling into your sensations in your belly.
Although,
And when you come back, wherever your mind was, it won't be there.
And it starts with recognizing that sensation
Yeah.
of your brain going
You
into
kind of,
fight or flight.
and what that also tells you is the thought that you were gripping so hard is just transitory. You know? So, right this moment, I'd like you all to just sit up straight. Okay. I want you to put all your awareness inside your chest and abdomen. And I want you to take 3 long, slow inhalations and exhalations, and notice all the sensations in your body that breathing generates. Relax your pelvic floor. Pause at the top and the bottom of the breath. Okay, what's your emotional state right now? Do you remember what you were thinking about, what you were feeling 3 breaths ago? Nothing's permanent. Whatever you were holding on to so tightly, it's not there. You're going to have to go back and try and resurrect it. You won't be able to.
I find that if I meditate frequently, this is easier to activate.
Sure, it's easier to activate because you can do it quicker. But all you have to do is do that to be freed from whatever was holding you or whatever you were holding on to. So I could do one. Was there another hand I saw up?
Could I ask a question?
Just one sec, go ahead, Jen.
What I noticed in talking about the pattern and the shift being made, that just bringing more conscious awareness to it, I can see it more clearly, and to see the expanding, I guess, the ripple effect of how my habitual patterns affect those people around me and teaches them how to treat me. And when I've made big shifts, they've been very much related to Jennifer's sense of self and the wake that came from that. I wasn't aware of at the time. It was like I got to save myself, so I kind of turned a corner really sharply, and there was a lot of fallout from that. And so I guess just being more aware of that, right, the impact on others, and that I have a choice. Right? Like there's something really empowering in thinking, I have a choice. I don't have to just be my patterns or my story or my history. I can turn a corner really quickly if I need to, because I have.
And why does it create ripples? It creates ripples because you've co-created yourself with others. When you shift, they're uncomfortable. because you are not who they've categorized you as being. So their automaticity effectively and yours together frees both of you. I mean, we all, I would suspect most of us realize that in relationships. You can't get out of a pattern. So why don't we go sit, and when you sit, I would suggest you, the thing about focusing on the breath, and almost all meditative traditions talk about focusing on the breath, and the reason is the sensations of breathing are always in the present moment. They're subtly pleasurable, and they sort of have no tendency to give rise to thought content. So if you settle into them, you tend to release your sense of self, your sense of separateness. And you're not thinking. And thinking is what is always separating. In other words, a thought is always taking something out of reality and choosing to focus on it. And usually it's from the past or it's in the future, it's not right here. So when you go to the breath, you go to just the sensations, just the experience of breathing. You're dropping thought. You can never be other than in the present moment. And it's always a good screen, if you will, or a platform from which you can observe what your mind does and what your body does in response to your mind and vice versa. In other words, if you sit and you focus on your breath, at first it'll get open and expansive. And then maybe a thought will creep up or a memory. And if you look closely, you'll notice you tend to feed it. Whether it's positive or negative, you tend to climb into it and emotionally identify with it. And then notice the feeling that arises in response to having climbed into it. And then if you keep your awareness of your breathing in the background, at some point you'll notice that you've been carried away into the past or future, into judgment. And you can come back to the breath and notice how the thought and the feeling both shift. So notice how they arise and pass away. And you also notice that once they're gone, they're gone. You can revive, a memory or something, but every time you bring it back, it's slightly different. It has a different taste, it has a different feel, a different emotional tone. So as you begin to watch how that happens, the breathing, awareness of your breath, even in the background, becomes an anchor which assists you in taking a third-person perspective on your thoughts and your emotions and their interaction on your habit patterns, because your thoughts are your habit patterns. Okay? Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So you talked about the not being able to break out of a relationship, and you talked about the dog and So what about group sociology and the idea of the grass is not greener on the other side, relocating to a place? I mean, I feel so much like group vibe, just deeply relaxing in the room with all these, Zen practitioners. What about going to like a more Buddhist country, or like maybe Dharamsala, living there, or, you know, relocating to where the group, you know, the Dalai Lama is the head figure.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And problems being insurmountable because of the population just has a culture.
Okay, great, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So first, Diane, my wife, went to Naropa and got a master's in Naropa University, which is Buddhist, you know, it was Chogyam Trungpa at the time in the 80s. And she went to Nepal for 6 months after she graduated, thinking this was going to be, you know, the land of lotus flowers and bucolic living. And, you know, it was just a poor, polluted, impoverished country. And it had some, yeah, it had a Buddhist flavor, but the Buddhism was very kind of traditional, magical. Nobody was meditating. You know, it was like every place else. And she came back and she just maintained her own meditation practice. And, you know, the teaching is that going, you know, the idea that going someplace else is the answer is basically, I would say, a consumer society remedy. In other words, if I get a better car, I'm going to feel better. Once the new car smell wears off, it's the same damn vehicle, you know. Just won't break down as fast. You don't need to go anyplace, you know. You've got everything you need right here, you just need to find it. There's a good story about a sort of prodigal son. This is the Indian version, you know, and the son decides he's going to go off and leave his wealthy father and go into the world and make his fortune. And the father sews a very valuable jewel in his cloak. And he goes off and he wanders around the world for 10 years and he comes back and he's bedraggled and beaten. And the servants conduct him in and his father shows him it was always there, you know. It's the same thing. I mean, whenever you think you need to get it someplace else, it's not what you need. Because the world, the external world, is never going to meet your needs. It's never going to conform to your preferences. And if you just think about it, why would the universe conform to your preferences? Why would it give a damn? Why would 7 billion people and a planet that's 4.5 billion years old conform to your preferences? Your problem is your preferences. It's not the problem with the universe. And if you can actually come to see the universe as it is and see yourself as you are, doesn't mean you're always going to be blissed out. It just means you're actually going to be living in reality as opposed to living in your head. So I don't think going to Dharamsala is going to help a lot.
But do you think that if you lived in a monastery for a year and practiced every day, just with all the other monks, you would train your brain more quickly than if you came here once a week and sporadically? And
I guess if you've got the time and the money,
yeah, exactly. It's not
and
practical.
you don't mind, you know, the sleeping schedule. What I was responding to is what I'm responding to is something that I think is really common and something that I also did myself. when I started practicing was there's this sense that get the sense there's something out there that I want. And, it needs to be acquired, and that somehow if I acquire it, it's going to be a permanent acquisition that's going to take care of all the stuff. So I wasn't responding to him, I was responding to myself. Going someplace, your question too, going someplace where there's intensive practice could be useful. And if you want to do that and you have the time to do that, I'd say go ahead. The caution, I think, is there's a lot of what I think is sort of mythology around the idea that you're going to be able to actually permanently put yourself in a position where you're not going to be afflicted by wanting things to be different than they are. Whether it's desire or aversion, you want to get rid of things you don't like, or you're going to want to get more of what you do like. And that if that actually is what you're seeking, it actually is contrary to sort of the teachings of the Dharma, which are that nothing's permanent and everything is always changing. And that it isn't out there. Can you gradually bring yourself to be more awake, more able to see when your habitual patterns are running away with you, when they're forcing you to react to somebody in a way that has very little to do with what the person is actually, how they're manifesting? Yeah, I think you can, and I think it's you can do it moment to moment, and the more you do it, the more you're capable of doing it. But it's also not something that you acquire for yourself, because what you're doing is really becoming more capable of interacting with others in a way that is mutually beneficial, and where you're actually able to be present to others in a way that sees them clearly, as opposed to caricaturing them. And if you just take a second, how many would like to be seen as a caricature? I mean, the answer isn't easy, because some of us, to some degree, in some of the roles we occupy in life, we want to be seen as a caricature because it's more powerful, or it's more seductive, or it's less vulnerable. But at a deeper level, we would love to be seen in all our manifestations. Because I think the neuroscience and the psychology and the physiology research would say that actually you feel most comfortable when you feel you're held safely by others and by yourself. And you can't hold others in a way that allows them to manifest without judgment unless you can do that to yourself. So your practice is really learn to be able to non-judgmentally accept yourself and be curious about what you see and to do the same for others. Because it's essentially the same process, the same equipment, the same neurology. Okay, so if you want to go see the Dalai Lama, go. I met him once for 20 minutes with somebody, and it was kind of amazing. So enjoy. Okay, thank you all.